Mia for Webroot, and today I'm going to discuss web security with you, and particularly the topic making the most of web security. There is a questions tab. If you wish to sort of ask questions, please just use that during the presentation. We'll come back at the end and answer all those questions. So without much ado, let's move on. If I can get my slides to move, that is always the problem first thing in the morning. You're not really. So this is going. Hang on. Ah, here we go. Good. Building. That's fine. That's great. So just really going to look at a number of aspects of web security. Basically, in the first part, look at the current web security challenges. They keep sort of morphing and changing, so important to look at that. Look at some of the deployment options you have around actually using web security and having a web gateway and protecting yourself from web threats. The top 5 features, which is really sort of things that we would recommend that you look for in any solution and why. And then actually we're going to cover, obviously being a SaaS company and a cloud company, why we think web security in the cloud is a better way to go than necessarily something like on-premise. But we'll cover that in sort of different modes and areas as we go through. So if we look at web security challenges, we're really still witnessing what I call unprecedented growth in the number and intensity of unique attacks. They've got attacks that leverage both multiple attack vectors and often combine sophisticated social engineering to re-infect the malware. And there's still lots of things going on. People using Facebook and Kubeface and other sort of variants, and that's still happening. The other thing we're seeing, of course, is the rise. In fact, I don't think the rise. I think the common use now of social networks in Web 2 communities. And there's a whole lot of issues then that gets raised around productivity and bandwidth there. The other really big thing about the web is, of course, that a lot of the threats that people are actually receiving, lots of the compromise people are receiving, actually are coming through those web vulnerabilities. And that's really sort of changing the thing. I think people in the past have always defended their email gateways, thinking that's the way that stuff comes in. But email gateways are so well protected these days, it's not really the threat. The real threat is the web. And also then the applications that are associated on the browser and with the browser. Another great big factor is, of course, people are mobile. They're out of the office now. So actually their issue with laptops, it's how do you control that? How do you manage that? Because you don't want them spending their time on a company laptop going to sites you don't want to go or wasting their time during the working day. So there's a whole challenge around then. How do you enforce security and get acceptable use policies working for those people? And finally, last but not least, we've got some figures on this, just the limited resources that are available in IT to deal with all these things. We've looked at typically what an admin spends sort of managing web, email, and endpoints, and it's like a third of their time is just spent just circulating around just the sort of the policies and stuff around that, just trying to keep everything running. So some big issues. So let's go and look at that a little bit further. This is quite a new sort of take. I mean, there's almost 18 million new and unique malware samples in 2011. So this is taken from abtest.org. If you look down the bottom right. If you haven't been to that site, I'd suggest you go. There's lots of useful information there. This was last updated, as you can see, on the 9th of January, and we're running at something like, yes, I said, nearly 18 million unique samples. So it gives you some idea about the growth. Again, if you look at 2010 and 2011, they're sort of pretty similar, but that's brand new. So that means that the number of new malware samples in 2010 and 2011 are almost identical. So it's you still get 18 million more happening, if you like, in 2011. I don't know if that explains. Maybe the next slide explains that a little bit clearer and better. So in this one, it should show. And I've just noticed that somehow the wrong thing is going to. Hang on, let's see how I've gone down. All right, let's go back. Actually, this looks like it's the wrong slide. Somehow crept in there. But 65 million unique malware samples circulating in 2011 too. Actually, it's the right slide. Sorry, I always get confused with 2011, 2012. They kept the column the same even though the year's not started. So, I think it just completes the argument, the fact you can just see that exponential rise in the amount of malware that's out there, and that's really all the point of these slides anyway. So, if we look at today's web threat profile, I think that's really different too. Primarily, it's all financially driven. It's the whole thing. It's no longer the script kid in his little room trying to deface a website or trying to block people off. It's really all financially driven. The criminals have basically become professional. They've got developers. They've got people to test stuff against anti-malware software. It's really all about trying to get money. And the attacks are also very targeted, particularly the use of unknown. I mean, I think the great threat at the moment is the fact just the number of unknown attacks that are hitting people, the fact that they're targeted at specific individuals, and spear phishing and all the rest going on. Another thing that really makes the web a bit threatening in the sense is that it's just the malware sophistication out there. It's really easy to go to hacking sites and actually buy exploits that are brand new and not been used before, or to actually get a kit to create these malware threats. So, that just makes it really easy and quite a low-cost thing for people to do too. So that's another sort of thing to bear in mind. It's not necessarily the most sophisticated people that are doing this. Sometimes it's quite less sophisticated people. So I think that's sort of quite self-explanatory. I think most surprising of all, given this sort of threat profile, all those things that are going on, our research has shown that less than 30% of small to medium enterprises have any form of web security infrastructure in place. And that is, I suppose, more scary than all the stuff that's going on about the web threats, is the fact that we're really not protecting ourselves against what's happening. Change the slide again. Sorry, for some reason my page down doesn't seem to be working. Here we go. So the next slide is really about, I think things people commonly talk about when they talk about web security within an organization on, web misuse. Employee web usage habits are still a challenge out there. An Osterman Group survey showed that various unproductive activities, people engage in while at work. And, web security is not just a technical issue. It's one better when combined, with sort of telling users and training them about what's going on, monitoring what's going on, and having a clear and sort of very easily understood, acceptable internet use policy, so people actually know what's expected of them. I think often we forget the fact that people, they come in an induction, they see a policy, they might read it very quickly, but not really reminded about the things they should and shouldn't be doing. And of course, there are implications. Employee productivity. If somebody's on Facebook or on other sites all during the day and not working, then that's got a big thing. If they're using streaming media and things like that, there's also impact on network bandwidth. You are liable as an organization if people are looking at inappropriate content and sharing that. That's something which HR and legal departments particularly want to hop in. And of course, the great thing about misuse, it's likely to encourage, if they go to those sort of sites, it's likely to encourage a higher sort of rate of malware infection. I think another thing that's coming into it is, obviously employees can now use personal devices in the office too and access the web as they like. So I think there's some sort of care and thing that has to be taken over that, and some sort of policy has to be put around that too. Even if you're not actually managing them, they've got to say, you've got sort of, you get the very gray areas now between, what's personal and what's business and what they're using it for. So I think you need to be able to apply rules to personal devices as well. I think I mentioned earlier that 85% of vulnerabilities come through the web, but really the most key thing is that the web application things are the most vulnerable. This is an OWASP 2010 stat. In fact, I was on their site the other day. They've not updated that since then. But they're saying over 60% of total attacks observed on the internet were launched against web applications. That's the Open Web Application Security Project Organization, if you want to know the name, and their site, I think, is basically, I think it's just simply the OWASP.org, actually. So if you want to go there, that's worth going to as well and having a look. So, we ask, why web applications are targeted, and the real answer to that is generally those things are created very quickly, and in many cases that avoids people doing what we call extensive Q&A, quality control on them. So the number of vulnerabilities that keep being discovered in web and software applications is now really far greater than the number of vulnerabilities you're going to discover in say, an operating system. Bless Microsoft, they've done a ton of work to make their OSs safer and safer and safer, and are constantly trying to keep ahead of the thing. And some of the other OSs are just as leaky, but maybe not so well advertised. I know there's lots of, the Mac OS is being attacked regularly at the moment and regularly compromised too. But really, applications are where they go. So as a result, more of the exploitation attempts against things like Adobe PDF readers, the browser Flash Player, Apple QuickTime, rather than Windows or Microsoft Office. In fact, the last stat I saw for this was I think that Adobe was the most attacked of all the applications. So I think there's another point here is that if its applications are being attacked, then that really means you've got to understand what applications actually exist on your endpoints, on your users, and actually have some form of being able to control that as well. Because obviously, There are tools out there that will let you sort of search for applications and make sure they're patched and up to date. Because if they aren't patched and up to date, you're going to be actually just building up more and more trouble and are more and more likely to get compromised by the malware. There is some other stats you can look at. I think it will help you with this. I mean, the SANS.org, if any of you are familiar with that, so SANS.org, they publish a lot of things about application vulnerabilities and the most common coding vulnerabilities too. So again, if you don't go to that site, lots of useful security information, I'm sure you do. Please do and go and have a look there. Another risk, and something which actually Jericho Forum, which gets some coverage these days, but I mean not as much as it should have, is they, for their credit, raised very on that we are witnessing the complete deperimeterization of the network. The practice of issuing laptops, as we've covered, has exposed them and organizations to additional security vulnerabilities. And again, we did some research on this, and we found that people with laptops, 30% of all malware infections were contracted by employee devices that were outside the company network. So that's quite a significant fact. And that both of those risks increase due to an inability to enforce security and internet use policies over people who are working from remote locations. And simply doing things like enforcing policies via mandating things like VPN access is not really best practice these days, because basically you're slowing things down for users and probably restricting what they can do too much. So we think there's some alternatives to that too. And we also think that other techniques like things like flash cookies and transparent authentication, which some people also use to sort of try and answer this, are really not the answer. They actually don't let you in the end. People can get around those things so easily. They don't let you in the end enforce the policies you want to do. So the network perimeter is very important, and the greater the diversity you have, the more things we have out there on devices, the greater the risks we're going to have. And as we all know, it's getting a lot more complex. Again, I have had this slide and used it before, but I did a lot of work updating it over the last couple of weeks, and the stats are really quite surprising. Gartner estimate that the worldwide Q3 2011 sales of smartphones at 115 million. I mean, that's huge, and that 26 of those percent are sort of mobile communication devices, so things like tablets as well. So individuals now have almost what I would call ubiquitous access to the internet, as well as access to hundreds of thousands of apps, many of which, as we said, contain these coding vulnerabilities. So that just presents more and more opportunities for malware writers and new challenges for IT security to sort of lock these things down. So the ability to secure these devices and enforce security internet and access data security policies is really critical. It's not just a nice to have any longer. It's pretty critical if you want to stop getting infected. And we've got lots of things. I'm not sure if it's in this presentation. We've got lots of stats on, with one customer I went and spoke to recently, and they were just saying to me, I've actually got a budget now for re-imaging machines. You get so much malware infection that he's actually set a budget aside because of the fact he knows he's going to have to re-image so many of his machines each week, and he's actually put that into costing, which is a pretty sad indictment of what his security's at, by the way, but that's another story. So let's change tack. We sort of looked at the web security part. Let's just quickly look at things like deployment options. What options do you have when it comes to deploying web security? Well, still there's the form factor of software. So it's still around. Load it on a server, run your own servers, run your own OS. The thing about that is it's likely to take up a lot of resources. There's high support costs for you. There's lots of involvement in getting that up and running and keeping it running. So that's traditionally the way it's been done, and a lot of people still use, on-premise software to do their web security, primarily running things like URL filters, or you might also be running, of course, a UTM device, and that takes us more to the next level, which is the appliance. Obviously, a lot less effort to do. Unless the appliance is a dedicated web gateway appliance, then it's likely, in my view, not to give you sort of protection you want. But that's another story. But the complexity is a lot less resources needed, and a lot more easier to manage as well. Of course, you will need two appliances, and so the cost factor there can be something to consider as well. And then finally, when you come to SaaS, software and service, well, obviously, very, very low in the length of complexity, because in fact we manage that, we keep everything up to date, everything on that side done for you. Really, it's just a question of giving you the control back, in the sense of giving you a management console to let you set the policies you want and against the users you want, and make sure that those policies are enforced and you can monitor and report on those. I think, as we said, I'm going to make the argument, of course, that SaaS is very much the way to go. I think also SaaS provides something else which people got to remember. It provides a very dynamic service that lets you scale easily, scale both up and down in the number of users, and it's supposed to go user-oriented pricing. You've got very much a fixed price. You know what your costs are, and there's some arguments about moving from capex to opex budgets, etc. You can sort of move between those. So it's not unlike an appliance, which is probably capital expenditure. You can move to an operational expenditure with a SaaS service. So something to consider when what you deployed or what you're planning to deploy. I must add that the on-premise web security still dominates. The majority deploy on-premise solutions. So 66% of the market still has email security on-premise, and 85% of web security on-premise. So a huge amount of people still do it on-premise. As I mentioned earlier, mind you, a lot of the smaller organizations have got nothing, so they're not really included in these stats. So I think it's sort of some way that sort of bends it around a little bit. I think what's often not communicated by the on-premise vendors, however, is the fact that they're going to spend so much time actually looking after those things. So, we looked at that, as I said, 32% of the time, it's like 57 hours per month just maintaining a solution. It's 19 hours per month just managing software and hardware updates. It's 17 hours per month re-imaging machines. So, you can see what the guy had the cost for re-imaging. And it's 16 hours setting and enforcing end-user policies. So there's a lot of time being spent just to, try to keep the defenses from breaking down. A quick thing on costs. I'm not going to dwell on this too much. Just some stats, obviously, in both the median costs in both pounds and in dollars, and you just sort of see what it's roughly going to cost you. So if you look at it, web security is going to cost you somewhere around £7.50, if you like, per user per annum. I don't want to substantiate that too much. I think cost is just there really to give you some idea. But I think the disappointing thing is that still people make the investment, and our research again has shown that still companies experience a hacking or malware attack in 2010. In fact, that's a 2010 stat, but we redid the research in early 2011, and it was the same in 2011. In fact, I've seen some results go up to 85% of companies are still getting malware. So, that has, again, a lot of impacts. Even when they've invested money, increased help desk time, declines network performance, reduction in employee productivity, damage to the company's reputation. Now, we think there's reasons for that, and there's reasons for that happening. And as I said, we think it's still down to the fact there's a predominance of on-premise, and actually there's a lack of time to do that amount of work that we sort of laid out in the last slide, and the time and labor spent. So we really think it's time to change, for people to change their web security model, to go from away from simple URL filtering, which is definitely not enough these days, which is just a productivity tool, to something which really looks at complete web threat protection. We think it's better to move away from running on-premise to actually running on the internet and the cloud, because we think that has a whole lot of advantages over the fact that people don't have to spend tons of time actually looking after their infrastructure. Instead, can just set policies and monitor and make sure those policies are enforced, and that reduces the workload significantly. But you can move away from looking at the capital budget expenditure just to making it an operational expenditure, and you're on a pay-per-use model as well, which I think is a huge advantage. And then you don't have to worry about constant capacity planning. You're actually moving to a real utility-based computing model. And the final point, just to be hardware and software. So again, let's turn tack. Let's look at what we think, given all that, are the top 5 things you should be looking for and why in a web security solution. So straight away, right at the top, real-time web threat protection. It's not, you really do need something which is actively looking and protecting you all the time. It can't be something that's you're waiting for updates to come down to an appliance or things. It needs to be continuous. So that's 48,000. I think in the previous slide said we have 48,000 new bits of malware per day. So I mean, I think that speaks for itself. Number 2, given the amount of work mobility and the use of multiple devices, I think to access the work, the internet at work and use it, applying, monitoring, and enforcing policy on devices that are allowed to connect to the network is absolutely critical, and including your roaming users. So you've got to have some way of making sure that everything's tied down, because you're just only as strong as that weakest link. And when you have with the constant change in the web, the ability to go in and make a policy change and rapidly enforce it because of a new threat or a new thing that's come to your attention, that's critical too. There's not, you can't wait for those things to happen. So having a very intuitive and easy to use web management console, you have to go in and change policy and enforce it and make it happen quickly. Very, very key. One of the things we did discuss earlier was sort of application. So the whole vulnerability scanning feature, that ability to proactively sort of go out there and say, I've got users, I've got so many users in this version of Acrobat. In fact, they need to be patched, they need to be updated, and actually be able to try and do something about it. That is also critical too, because that's going to mitigate, as I said, lots and lots of the risks, because that's the way lots of the malware actually gets in. And of course, ease of use, I think was still mentioned anyway, and scalability, I think, all part of that. The fact you can just sort of consume it as you need. Get the slide to move forward. So, I'm going to briefly show you the Webroot Web Security Service. So just to give you some of how it stacks up against some of these requirements and to give you some sort of indication of how it is. So this is sort of the dashboard you would come to if you used our service. It's got 6 things there, which you can see you can actually organize the way you want it. So looking at block size, looking at bandwidth usage, time spent surfing. There's actually there's a sort of a word, top search engine section there. And I get my lips to work. There is a search engine string thing there, which shows you the words that people are most commonly feeding into their search engines, which is actually a quite interesting thing to look at because it sort of gives you some idea of what people are sort of doing, whether they're working or not, or they're looking at Marilyn Monroe or something else, or Britney Spears. But so it's good information. Again, can sort of help you sort out your policy, etc. I think when it comes to enforcing, the usage policies and the productivity, you need something that's, very efficient at doing that. Webroot actually bought a company a couple of years ago called BrightCloud. It's got the largest URL database, which is over 280 million websites. It's constantly updated every 5 minutes, and it allows you to sort of select from 80 categories and also create white and black lists. And you can then do various things about whether you want to allow a site at certain times, want to block it always, or only block it at certain times, or select your users override that functionality, say, if I'm pressing an override button, but you don't have to give that. And we also got something called a coaching function, which means when people do searches, they can actually see the results, put out there. I think I will show that a little bit later on. It uses URL reputation analysis, so, we can block URLs based on site reputation and their malicious behavior. So that's very, very key, and, reputation is a very, very strong cloud thing and something we leverage very hard. And as I said, quote and time controls, which really make it really easy to set flexible policies around when you want people to be able to go to certain places. Because you might say, well, actually, I'm quite happy for people to use up my internet bandwidth at lunchtime to go to BBC iPlayer and stream the news and do stuff like that. Or you might say, actually, I don't want any of that stuff going on during the day, so as long as they do it before 9 o'clock or after 6 o'clock at night, then that's fine. So that sort of thing gives you a lot of flexibility, and I think it's very important and fits in this thing about securing things. One of the other things we have is what we call proactive scan ahead search feature. As I mentioned before, this applies the acceptable internet use policy to the search results actually, and so you actually see, as you can see on the left, you see things being blocked like gaming and gambling. In fact, if you look at placing a bet, I think our politics discussion forum there, you can see, get my cursor there to allows, but it's really color coded clearly to show each user permitted access rights, and that policy may be applied down to individual user level that's required. So you could actually even have that right down to that level. Probably it's not going to do that. You can do it by groups of people, and you can decide how you want to do that way. But again, being able to enforce this and make it very clear to people what policies you're enforcing, I think is very, very key. Now, you mentioned vulnerabilities, and one of the very unique things we have in our web service is actually endpoint vulnerability scanning. We can actually scan those endpoints. It happens extremely quickly. It takes less than 15 seconds. We're looking at the SANS.org. I think I mentioned that earlier for their sort of chief threats. So that's all the things like your Adobe, your QuickTime, and everything else. So bring those all out. It also it's quite clever because we also scan memory for spyware infections at the same time. And that's partly because Webroot's history has been as a spyware company, so that's sort of built in. And again, these can be scheduled. They can be selective. You can decide you can do it by an individual user, you do it by a group of users, and you can set that off, and it all reports back, and you get, as you can see there, quite a nice little report, which tells you who the user was, full scan, the machine name, what the scan time was. So you can see that was very short, like 6 seconds here. Steve demoed an edit, and I don't say anything about that. You know, what OS they were using, and then actually what was found out and what was the fail result. So it was QuickTime here was failing, and actually Acrobat was actually positive for a change. So good news. Reporting and logging are also very key. As I said, you've got a real-time customizable management dashboard. I mean, I think there's about 15 different things you can vary through that dashboard. So you can really get things on there that are really important to you, and that could be something that you can have up on a screen if you want all the time, or just open in a browser somewhere. Our reporting can be both ad hoc and scheduled, and that's actually a great flexibility. We actually have real-time logs. So in fact,